Good afternoon, everyone. You're at Radio Ubuntu, radio in the time of Corona. So we are continuing our Coronaversations with a different topic this week. And we will be discussing COVID-19, nationalism and cultural intimacy with my guest, Mete Hatay. Mete, thanks for joining us. Thanks for making the time for us. Thank you. Now, I want to introduce you first briefly before we start our discussion.
Okay.
Mete Hatay has been a senior research consultant with the Peace Research Institute, Oslo's Cyprus Center since 2002, and he's a columnist with the Havadis newspaper since 2015. Along with his many popular articles and research reports, he has published academically in journals such as Ethnic and Racial Studies, American Ethnologist, Middle Eastern Studies, the Cyprus Review, Journal of Modern Greek Studies, History of Memory, and Journal of Balkan and Near Eastern Studies. He's also the co-author with Rebecca Bryant of Sovereignty Suspended, Building the So-Called State, which will be forthcoming in June 2020. So, Mete, now I want to kind of start the discussion with a broad question. We will be discussing nationalism, and most of the time, if you look at the discussions going on these days, nationalism, everybody's talking about what's going to happen to nationalism. This is an ongoing discussion, at least for the last 10 years with the rise of right-wing populist governments, etc. But most of the time, nationalism is seen as something rather negative. So I want to start the discussion with the link between nationalism and democracy, because nationalism also plays a significant role in terms of like democracy, state building, etc. So let's start with that discussion. What is the link between nationalism and democracy?
I mean, it's inherently they are linked. I mean, democracy means people. I mean, with the democratic regimes, you go for voting and you seek to look for the majority rule. Even back in antique times, back in Greece, you had the citizens who are the privileged community, citizens belonging to certain demos, and the slaves and the others. Yes, so democracy is inherently linked with nationalism. You can suppress it up to a certain point, but it always comes back with, especially during crisis. This discussion was started to appear after the Soviets collapsed. When the Soviets collapsed, there was this, how come that all these states appearing and going back to democracy, but nationalism is coming with it as well. But as I said, it is inherently linked anyway. When you put the voting the regime there, people use certain commonalities to attract groups to win the elections. Yeah, so the nationalism is the biggest tool, emotional tool, ideological tool for the groupings to be exercised. So it's nationalism cannot exist without democracy in that sense. Yes. Of course, we talk about banal nationalism, racism, and everything, and this autocratic regime whatsoever. But usually, even the strict nationalists need democracy, but they prefer it as plebiscitarian democracy. They call it regimes. Yeah, they need votes. Even Saddam Hussein was having elections, 99% support. They need legitimization for their power, and that's democracy it can be a tool as well, apart from being inherently linked.
Yeah, and also it reminds me of Benedict Anderson's concept, the imagined community, nations being imagined communities, because at the end of the day, it's nationalism that constructs nations rather than the other way around. So you kind of, through nationalism, you establish this political community. It kind of also constructs which you need for democracy, of course. Yeah. Right. Now, I want to ask you a question about the context right before the COVID-19 era. I mean, there was a discussion before the COVID-19 era about a shift that is happening, like a shift from universal civic nationalism towards a blood and soil ethnic nationalism in a number of countries. We have seen this discussion in did in Trump's America, in Poland, in Austria, even in other countries, not like maybe there were not right-wing populist governments, but we have seen these concepts becoming stronger in China and India. So maybe we have to start by discussing the difference between this exclusive and inclusive nationalism, because on the one hand you have this universal civic nationalism based on citizenship, and then you have this blood and soil ethnic nationalism, which seems to be gaining power, like it's becoming much more stronger, especially after the 2008 conflicts.
I don't agree totally with you there. The new nationalisms we are facing now is more religious nationalism, which is a concept when you look at India, for example, is the Hindu nationalism. Yeah, there's no ethnicity there. It's the Hinduism is.
I agree.
And same thing in Turkey now, Islamic Turkish nationalism. Yeah, it's there's all this religious element there. And as reactions of European countries or Western countries is towards Islam, or Islamophobia is playing a huge role in the new nationalist movements in the West when we look at it. America, for example, you see black and white people together against Islam, or opening new mosques, or because they perceive Islam as radical Islam or political Islam, and they have these fears, which are played out by a lot of politicians like Trump and other people. So I believe that we are facing a new nationalism. When I say new, of course it's been around, of course it was always there, but more extensively usage of religion in nationalist groupings. Yeah.
Can you expand on this, like this new nationalism a bit more? Like, how is it different from old nationalism? Because at some point
I'm saying, but I corrected myself after that. It's not new. It's been always there. Like establishing nationalism, unit these commonalities. Yes, sometimes religion, language, and everything. And in this case, especially after the post-Soviet period, starting with especially Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Afghanistan, there you could see the clashes of new religions, not new religions, clash of the religions in a new context. Yeah. In Afghanistan, after getting rid of the Russian or Soviet occupation, there was all immediately a rise of a new kind of religion, Muslim religion, Islamic religion, influenced by Wahhabi movements and everything. And then in Bosnia, the victimization of the Muslims during the Bosnian War, that Europe didn't come on time, Christians only care for Christians, kind of rhetorics and propagandas, it played a huge role in the demonization of the sites, or sort of creating a tension between these two religions. And also even academically, having all this preordained or little bit self-fulfilling prophecies in writing that clash of the civilization also prepare the fertile ground for this kind of new, when I say new, as I say, revival of religious nationalism. But religious nationalism was there, of course. When you look at Pakistan, India, it was always there. Muslim Hindu clash was there, but it's now even more vocal, more active, and different in a way. The Pakistan India was a more post-colonial conflict. It was the way of the exit from the colonial regime, and so there was this numerically smaller number of Muslims against the bigger Hindu population, trying to be more secure and all this, and utilization of this fear by the politicians of then, and creating Pakistan eventually and Bangladesh. But now India is, they don't have a threat in a sense internally. Muslims are not seeking for separations or a separate autonomy. This is just a domination of the majority Hindu government over the minorities, minority religions. Yeah, when you look at the Western Europe, what emerging there is the fear of Muslims becoming bigger or visible, more visible in the landscape as well, because you have now second, third generation Muslim children who knows the laws, who knows how to advocate their causes and their rights, and they are utilizing the Western democracy, Western, when I say Western, liberal democracy, to seek for their rights. And that is causing a fear among the majority people by facing a huge mosque in the middle of their neighborhood. Uh, Even though they are not so religiously Christian, identity-wise, they identify themselves with more Christian-like. Like in Holland, 35% see themselves as religious, yeah, believer among the Christians, yeah. But Muslims, 65% see themselves as believer. So it's there are these new clashes appearing on landscape. It has many reasons and depends on different location, varies as well. But it's a trend. You could easily see it as a trend there. This expansionism of certain the political religious group, expansionism in a sense that when you look at Turkey's uh, new Ottoman view, they want to expand their own version of Islam to the countries they have influence on. So you have these clashes in Bosnia, for example. Bosnia has been influenced with more El Azhar Egyptian kind of school of thought in Islam. They don't want. They love Turkey. They want to have relationship with Turkey, more close relationship with Turkey, but they also complain about the Turkish Islam, for example. Uh, so this kind of new clashes are appearing beside between not Christians, but between Islamophobics and believers in that sense, which usually ends up as even those people who are nominally believer can end up as a target by this Islamophobic attitudes and getting stronger and stronger. But on the other hand, you have also the revival of political Islam everywhere in where you have the majority of Islam and also minority in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, what you said reminded me of a couple of things. I mean, when it comes to Turkey, for example, how Erdogan's party has been using religious elements in this. There's a new construction of nationalism by AKP, and it's interesting because they're using these religious elements. And, for example, the way they are trying to address the Kurds. The Kurds are not Kurds, but the Kurds are usually addressed as Sunnis. So
Yeah.
AKP has been trying to gain the support of the Sunnis in that sense. So yes, there is a significant like religious element there. Yeah, another question I wanted to ask you, in line with my previous question, there is this discussion in the literature that this so-called exclusive form of nationalism is becoming stronger. And in the case of Trump, Brexit, what I mean by exclusive form of nationalism, you know what we have seen this, all of us, and you mentioned this also in your in what you said. People who have been born in Britain, even though they were born there, they speak perfect English because they have a background for, like their parents were from Bangladesh or they're Arabs. They have been excluded, and people said, "Go back. This is not your country." Blah blah blah. So this is what I mean by exclusive form of nationalism that has been really on the rise. That was what we were discussing in the COVID process. So there is a section in the literature that argues that the rise of this exclusive form of nationalism is increasingly challenging the post-1945 liberal order. What do you think about this question, this discussion?
Sure, of course, it is in a way. The neoliberal politics, of course, played a huge role in reshaping people's worries, in a sense, because informal labor has increased everywhere. Because in neoliberal or disguised white capitalist systems, the dependency on immigrant informal worker has increased everywhere, and that also caused, of course, serious damage to the local labor in that sense. So the local labor, we see a lot of transformation among the local labor or populations into more defensive, more nationalist attitudes in regards against the immigrants. Of course, they cannot say that immigrants are enemies and everything. But as I say, they use these excuses such as the political Islam to demonize them in order to diminish the appearance of these people in their own economies and causing a huge competition in labor markets as well. So we have to also talk about that part of the thing. There is a huge movement of the people because of the discrepancy in the world of the wealth distribution. There is a continuously increasing move towards wealthy states, and the wealthy states are increasingly more becoming an introvert with building gates around countries. First, they try to form an alliance like European Union to have a Festung Europa. Now, within Festung Europa, there are other Festungs appearing, like or runaways like Brexit, Brittany, saying, I cannot tolerate your politics. Is too much tolerance on immigrants, kind of excuses they used, and they escaped from this. A lot of it is constructed, but there's real also competition, which is bringing with the Polish workers in England or the others. It's perceived, most of it, but it is there. So a lot of workers, the working class, are frightened of people coming and taking their jobs away, even though they are not taking their jobs away. They they are working in these newly created sectors rather than the old mining sector in Yorkshire hasn't collapsed because of the immigration. It was the Margaret Thatcher policies decided that the coal is not good anymore. Let's shut it down and let's have petrol instead of as a fuel. So this kind of decisions has caused, of course, environmentally it was important not to use coal as well, but it had these repercussions on the people who has been working with coal for the last 500 years. So all these new energy, seeking for new energy sources or new methods of production, is influencing this turmoil, continuous turmoil. And nationalism, uh, as I say, it's connected with democracy. As Churchill said, I don't like democracy, but it's the best one of the worst. So the people, there's this question of what would we do without the democracy, kind of questions coming from a lot of liberal people. There, nationalism survives within democracy. It's inherently they're linked. Every time there's a fear or need for urgency and togetherness and binding together, whatever, who's going to bind together question comes up. So then you start choosing. Let's choose this village, for example. Our villagers are priority, not these new guys who bought the house and la la la. So you start having a problem. Who's in group? Who's out group? Kind of debates, and this is what exactly happening in Western Europe, but also in other countries such as receiving countries. There are countries who sends labor, receives expats, selling them. You sell them houses and whatever. After a while, they will create a problem as well. They haven't done yet, but it will be a sort of tension. They raising the home prices, they raising the rent prices. For example, in Cyprus, we have 100,000 students. They are renting flats, and locals cannot find to rent a flat. Okay, locals usually have. I mean, in Cyprus, the people who doesn't have a house or whose parents don't have a house, because we received a huge house stock from Greek Cypriots as a loot in 1974. So it's there's a transfer of wealth from one generation to other generation. So there are many people looking for houses, but it still affects the rents and purchasing of a house for a new couple, for example. The, this kind of competition. So that this will it is causing fear, anxiety, and this kind of introvertness with certain rhetorics. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in relation to what you said, especially countries turning in more kind of inward, there is this discussion also that like all these things that we know that defines the post 1945 liberal international order. This was interdependence, countries trading with one another, and all that is somehow being undermined. Because if you look at the United States as the global hegemon of the world, what you see is it has pulled out of certain multilateral agreements. It keeps on signing bilateral agreements with different countries, even after the COVID crisis. The Trump said, I'm going to stop the financial aid to the World Health Organization. For a long time, he kept on referring to the COVID crisis as China disease, whatever. So there is also this discussion about, what it's going to lead to, if it's going to lead a real change or not. Okay. Now, what about the impact of COVID-19 on nationalism? What's the impact of the pandemic on nationalism, do you think?
It will reinforce the walls that I have been talking about more, but also it is also a time for examining yourself. Like a lot of countries. For example, in America, Trump was complaining about the Mexicans. He was talking about building a wall between Mexico and United States of America. But now he said that he's postponing to deport the Mexican workers because he needs them in places where the people are quarantined and they cannot go to work, that they can do the works. Kind of pragmatic or sort of opportunist way of approaching new system. So the new nationalist leaders, if we call them nationalists, are very opportunist. They are more business minded. When you look at them, all of them are linked with this neoliberal way of looking at the world. Not going in depth of analysis, staying superficial, and acting with daily, not with big, huge strategies or ideologically strategies. What is the ideology of Trump? Doesn't exist. They call him WASP nationalist. He is not. He is just a businessman, opportunist businessman with a very primitive way of doing business kind of models in his mind. Less humanist, less sensitive towards the environment, less. It's only money, money, money. Like the way he is running a casino or a hotel, So you look at other leaders, you find quite similar attitudes, even though some are real nationalists, like Netanyahu is a Zionist, nationalist, whatever. But his attitude again is economically driven in most of the cases, with the occupying areas or increasing the amount of the settler politicians, or how to deal with this two-state solution which has been on the table. He's talking about the annexation of Gaza and other places, and ethnic cleansing he's talking about. It's without any responsibility, thinking very, yeah, there's new kind of tricksters around as leaders, charismatic leaders are playing, and that's the case in every liminal periods or transition periods, that these populist characters appear, and they start sort of miming the people. What people, for example, raise their hands, they raise their hands, so that people think that they understand them. But no, they're just copying them, yeah, mimicking them. So without thinking what if the people is right or wrong in this sense, and what are the repercussions of the demand of the so and so village or so and so groups, without thinking of that, without thinking critically of anything. It's just populist movements. You see that in Ersin Tatar's attitude, for example, in Cyprus. Every day you see that. I mean, this populist way of shortcuts and opportunistic moves and changing ideas constantly, not feeling guilty about not being sort of how do you say uh, making sense in a sense, without worrying that you can say anything goes in a sense, and that's the real anything goes period that we are going through now, unfortunately. So nationalism is just one of the tools that they are playing with. They're not even nationalists in a sense, that you have emotional nationalists that comes from certain uh, background. Yeah, they're like a guy in Turkey who's been humiliated, who's been called only you are Turkish, you're not Kürt, whatever, they were calling them other names and everything. He can react with more identity oriented. Yeah. So it's also important to look at who is the majority nationalism and minority reactionary nationalism. It's totally different. There is a majority sort of in a way imposing its identity on minorities, trying to transform them, trying to create a monolithic community with one religion, with one language, with one attitude and ideology. And there's also that you have a group trying to sort of survive in a way. Look, I have my cultural rights, I have my language, I have my whatever, and that's also can be identified as a nationalism because you are defending your own little community. So it's very important not to mix these two kind of nationalisms.
Just something that you told me made me think. I mean, what is the ideology of Trump? I mean, he's usually referred to as a populist, and the typical definitions of populism is usually defined as a thin ideology, which can go together with other thick ideologies, which is socialism, right? I don't know, fascism, and stuff like that. But populism is all about dividing the society into two, as corrupt elites and the people. And the funny thing is, somebody as privileged as Trump, who comes from all this power and money, he kind of he portrays himself as the voice of the people against the corrupt elites. But
And he's
I
also
think
targeting banks, interestingly. Like
isn't there a racial dimension to what he's doing? I mean, I'm thinking about making America white again, and his rhetoric against the Mexicans. It seems like he did manage to kind of mobilize them.
He is using these rhetorics. It's not
Yeah,
that. Yeah, he doesn't. When you look at his background, you don't see he had
I understand what
a
you're saying.
lot of Afro American people working for him, or close friends and everything. I mean, he's just using whatever he can to get in power and have the majority support them. In America, yes, WASP sensitivity is the majority. So he's playing for that. And what are they frightened of? They are frightened of Mexicans or Latinos. Oh, everybody will speak Spanish in Spain in 50 years or 100 years, kind of fears he's playing with. But I mean, he's married to an immigrant woman. he he's, well, of course, when I say no ideology, yeah, making money is his ideology, and also enjoys his egocentric ego trips that he's having. He's a narcissist in a lot of senses, and he likes this position. I mean, he doesn't need the state leadership to become a rich. He's already rich. He's just doing it for his ego trips. And doing it terribly. uh, and he's using all these groups. He had assistants for coming from real racist backgrounds, like having connections with different neo-racist, neo-Nazi groups and everything. But if you ask me whether Trump is a neo-Nazi, no. He's just using, he knows America well. He knows the American people, their sentiments. He knows that in places like Central America or southern part of United States of America, still people are still in with their memories of the Civil War. Federalists and Confederalists. That war is still on. They haven't had the reconciliation between the geographically between these areas in the United States of America, and he's using these sentiments of people who likes General Carlson, whatever his name was. People like what's his name? The Dustin Hoffman, not Dustin Hoffman. It was this guy acting in this running guy.
Forrest Gump.
Forrester, Forrest Gump, yeah, like General Forrester. You still have a city named after him. He is the founder of Ku Klux Klan. Yeah, so he knows that these people exist there, and he just throws them certain, favors, let's say, to get their votes. Yeah.
Okay. This brings me to my next question. Recently, there is this discussion about, like, when people are trying to make sense of COVID-19 and countries' reaction to it, they are using this concept of cultural intimacy. And you have also used this cultural intimacy concept in your own, like, a few articles that I read. What is cultural intimacy, and how does it help us to understand, make sense of countries dealing with the COVID-19 crisis today in general terms? And later on, of course, we can discuss what's going on in Cyprus as well.
And this term was coined by Michael Hersfield, as you know, in his studies, studying the mountain villages in Crete, actually, how the villagers use shaming and naming, in a sense, to sort of keep certain things for themselves. It's like they use this, the village is going to be, in a way, exposed if we, talk about this or show some of the faults that actually can demonize the whole community and become a self-censorizing habit after a while. And most of the countries' political movements as well have this thing, to defend your own community from shaming and naming. You sort of put soil over your own faults and everything. And I think it was Emil it was Emil actually was talking about Brittany's Brexit and how Britain became oversensitive towards criticism from outside, and in a way it started behaving like, oh, this is our own problem. We have to discuss this. Our priority is in our hands. Why should the others interfere in our own problems? We're gonna solve this kind of attitude. You see this in small societies, but also in big places. The European Union also has started this cultural intimacy kind of thing in certain levels, that European ideals are jeopardized by doing pushbacks at the borders of European Union, and they're censorizing this news. They're becoming very quiet about it, and European-wide attitudes. It's only certain activist groups are left to voice these things. Journalists, big newspapers are silent about it. It's becoming more and more quiet about what goes on in the sea against these poor immigrants trying to reach to a safer shores. A lot of pushbacks. A lot of pushbacks means thousands of people been drowned in the sea, in Mediterranean and everything. And no one talks about it. It just passes by. I mean, we don't talk about it. In the Greek, in the Republic of Cyprus, pushed 170 people back in front of our eyes, and they ended up in the north. And what happened? We sent them to Turkey, and Turkey will send them to the places where they ran away from, and no one talks about it. Again, it's if we talk about it, then we sort of people will ask you, "You're sending these people to a dangerous place. Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" And and people don't want to be ashamed because clandestinely they agree with what the actual government is doing. Because I received hundreds of messages saying, "Oh, if you look after them well, they will call their relatives and cousins, and we have enough population in North Cyprus. Now we have the refugees. Oh my God, we're gonna be la la la," kind of fear burst out in Iskele, for example, Iskele area, and this kind of stuff. But because you can not put it on a newspaper and become exposed or international or anything, countries started to be more secretive, more introvert, keeping certain issues for themselves, uh, and turning it into intimacy. Yeah, these are our intimate problems. In a sense, we shouldn't talk about it. You know. Otherwise, our community could be in danger. It's like the Vatican for years kept all the pedophiliac priests under this secrecy, yeah, or intimacy, and
Yeah.
a lot of Catholic followers shut up. They didn't talk about it, not to harm their religions in that
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is a very dangerous thing. It's against critical thinking, and also facing and having, sort of seeing the actual situations properly.
Confronting. Exactly.
Yeah, confronting them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And another question is on your article. In 2008, you published an article with Rebecca Bryant
Yeah.
entitled "Just Descent of Nicosia: Of Returns, Revolutions, and the Longing for Forbidden Past." Now, in this article, and this has been an influential article that has been discussed a lot, you are arguing that jasmine flower represents Turkish Cypriots' rebellion against Turkey's colonization of the island.
Mhm.
You talk about some kind of a nostalgia for the old Nicosia, characterized by jasmine flowers, some kind of a nostalgia for this old, maybe not contaminated Cyprus, let's say.
Yeah.
So this article was published in 2008. We are in 2020. What has changed in the course of these 12 years with respect to this issue? What can you
They
say?
they stop using metaphors like jasmine, and they openly say it now. What they want to say.
They openly
uh,
say
yeah, the people are more openly saying it's that they don't want Turkey interferences here. But what I said there, it wasn't Turkey's interferences. Jasmine was used more like the demographic interferences, in a sense that they perceived anyone coming from Turkey as a polluting their own little nostalgic identity, how pure they were, how white they were before these Fijas came and made them brown. In that sense. And you see that in a lot of the literature written that period. I mean, a lot of column writers were using metaphors like that. Like one column writer was complaining about the proliferation of pigeons in Nicosia, because in the old days Cypriots were living in Nicosia and they were eating the pigeons, but now immigrants don't eat pigeons, so the population of the pigeons appeared, I mean, increased, and now you have all these pigeons shitting everywhere, kind of, sort of, in a way, meaning that, like pigeons, immigrants are shitting the area, kind of. Paraphrases they were using in there, and then they are still, of course, using it, but it's become more direct now. This kind of sentiments, and also it's it's changed in a way that back in 2008, this sentiment was widely used by even the left. Yeah. But now I can see that in the left discourse, there's a shift from just being anti-immigrant, anti-whatever, to more the influences of Turkey as political influences or democratic interferences in democratic regimes, and the political will of Turkish Cypriots. Before, they weren't challenging the Turkish state and their openly. They were sort of taking on these immigrant workers that they are bringing to work and do their work in a way. So there's a shift, and all right, now you see that right is becoming more like the leftist reactions of the 2008. Now the more right wing, even including Ersin Tatar, was complaining about the immigrant workers' children, that they come and they bring their children, and do I have to look after them as well? So until a robot is invented, these people will make children, and if you want to depend on immigrant workers or human labor, you will have to sort of course, take care of their kids, their wives, or whatever, or husbands who are injured in the construction sites. So, but I see that left now, at least certain big chunk of left is become more uh, sensitive with the issue of how Cypriots are dealing with the immigrant influx. Yeah, at least they started making a distinction between the Turkey's political, military, whatever influence on Cyprus and the immigrants. Yeah. Uh, Now, right, or especially circles in UBP, these neo-rich circles, this new middle class, is becoming more xenophobic, let's say, than
Mhm.
the reactions. Because left started with a reaction against the interference of Turkey, but that got out of hand sometime with the rhetorics and the discourses to hit the normal, ordinary labor, proletariat that they're supposed to be defending of. Yeah. So at least now things are sort of uh, sitting in their own paradigms in that sense. You could see that the people who complain about the immigrants are the new rich, the new middle class, more right-wing leanings, and then left is becoming more empathetical towards the proletariat coming from other countries.
Yeah, but Mete, I have a observation. I don't know if you agree with me. I mean, I agree that there has been some shift in the left-wing circles, but isn't there a generational change there? Because as far as I can
Yeah,
observe, people have been people in their 30s and 40s who are now at the forefront, like lawyers, academics, people working in NGOs, etc., especially who were abroad and came back.
yeah,
They
yeah,
seem to be much more aware of this issue, and they don't want to otherize the immigrants. But when it
yeah,
comes to a generation before, teachers, labor unionists, people
yeah,
that you would expect to be much more open, you realize that there's still this micro-nationalism in a way towards not only Turkish immigrants, but even like African students and others. There's
yeah,
always this emphasis on being genuine Cypriotness, genuine Turkish
yeah.
Cypriotness. And the way
Sheftali
they,
thing.
yeah, the Sheftali issue was very interesting. How can you, politicize something that, is part of your daily cuisine? How can this become, but the identity is being constructed on the basis of things like molihia and
Yeah,
Sheftali, and you're trying to identify this as your main thing, and which is interesting because I have a sense that, I mean, the more Turkish Cypriots are feeling incompetent. Like the more they're feeling, I don't know, they feel under pressure, they feel like sandwiched between Greek Cypriots and Turkey, it seems like they're turning inwards. And this kind of brings me to my last question. What is the impact of this COVID-19 crisis? What are the repercussions of the COVID-19 crisis in Cyprus when it comes to nationalism and reconciliation? What can we say about this?
Yes, I mean, you're right. There is a generational difference there because of the attitudes. Thank God, after 2003, many people had the chance to go and study abroad and everything, and sort of learn the different ways and means to look at this sociological and economic problems in that sense. So you could see that the father and son, or father and daughter, or mother and daughter, can have a debate among themselves with how to look at the workers in that sense. And you are still right that the certain certain generation who hasn't been abroad and stayed in Cyprus all the time is still using that demonization discourse regarding the immigrant workers, not just settlers, but immigrant workers. But at least now you have this new generation trying immediately interfering and saying, "Hey, what you doing?" kind of thing. Before that didn't exist either. The only defendants of the people was again from nationalist circle. Oh, you are demonizing Turks, kind of attitude they were using, and making it worse the situation. Yeah. And it's still, I can see that you have this settler party that every time if someone says something against the Turkish government or critical something against the Turkish government, immediately they come as the advocates. But come on, I mean, they have to learn to sort of defend certain principles. Not everything Turkey does is good, not everything the Turkish Cypriots do is good as well. So you have this emotionally blockaged kind of collectives now fighting constantly. The COVID exposed some of the things that not everything is the immigrants or Turkey or imperialist or West or what. Like, people are now seeing that some of the clumsiness, some of this lack of enthusiasm to make certain things work, is because of our own fault. And why is it our fault? We have develop this defeatist kind of attitude that we cannot do anything until a messiah comes and solves the Cyprus problem. This was always around as well in different forms. Before TRNC is recognized, you cannot do anything kind of attitude was there. After that, it became, if the embargoes don't go away, we cannot do anything. And then you had the isolation. If the isolations haven't, if the isolations don't stop, we cannot do anything kind of thing. Now we have this, if the solution doesn't come, it means that you cannot do anything. Of course, I mean, it's not a contradiction to want solution and do something at the same time. But also there's this uh, I mean, you have this. You look at the leftist history. I mean, for years the feminist movement was suppressed because we were waiting for the revolution. For years, the gays were checked out from the party because these issues should not be discussed until a revolution. We shouldn't look after environment and la la la. These are all liberal tactics wants to divide us into pieces. Kind of discussions we had, yeah, in the leftist movement. And then after the revolution didn't realize, we had this melancholy, constant melancholy. Yeah, and we write a lot of poetry, poems and things like that regarding the unfairness of the world afterwards. But we never thought of sort of challenging, piece by piece, feminism. What? At least you change the law, and the woman has a shelter now. The gays are not being put in the prison because someone defended their rights. Yeah, and it's the same thing with the environment. We have to do something about the environment. We cannot wait for the international community to come up with a peace plan and to take the people from their ears and make them sign a peace agreement. So what I'm saying is this leftist melancholy has been adapted to Cyprus case now. We cannot do anything, whatever. And the COVID at least showed that we can do something if we try. I am hoping that now this is what I am doing is it's not the analysis or academic research results that I'm talking about. I hope that we at least we can see the situation and we can use this opportunity to do the X-ray of this area, the northern area of Cyprus, so that we can actually identify all the illnesses existing. Because what happens is, for years there's this dust everywhere. You don't know, you cannot know the certain numbers, data. You know it, but you suppress it. You don't want to show it to anyone. You hide who is the suppressor and the suppressed, by doing this dust. So we have to get rid of this dust, and I thought COVID is doing that with a wing of illness to get rid of this other illness. Let's see. We will see it. That's why we have to demand a proper evaluation of the situation in the north in order to prepare a proper strategy for the peace. Otherwise, it will be daily tactics of using certain rhetorics to uh, pretend that you are doing opposition and reproducing the status quo constantly. You know what I mean? Without having any strategy, and you only react to certain things, especially when they talk about your salaries and everything. But the actual system has not been challenged. We have to challenge it. We have to challenge the system in every way and means. And also, we have to challenge the asymmetric relationship with Turkey. We shouldn't wait until a solution comes before we say, come on, Turkish army should, at least transform itself from offensive to defensive. We can manage our borders with 2,000. I don't know the militarist, of course, numbering, but 2,000 instead of 30,000, because we have 20% of the north as military areas. We cannot move around. We cannot put the fires out. I mean, sometimes, you cannot even change the direction of the road. So we have to openly challenge these things. And if there's a reaction comes from our challenging, then we have to act accordingly. And it is called struggle. We have to do the struggle as it is, literally struggle, not as if struggle.
Okay, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, and I'm going to ask you a question which you might not really like, but I have to ask it because people have been discussing this. I agree with what you're saying, but aren't there some structural constraints? I mean, to what extent do we have room for maneuver here? You're talking about, I don't know, discussing number of military, but nowadays it has been like this for a long time. North Cyprus is dependent on Turkey in financial and political terms. So as long as you have this independence, how are you going to achieve what you're saying? Some of them is achievable, of course, but regarding the number of troops, for example.
You decrease the number of dependents. By increasing reconciliation measures with the South, you need less militarist measures in the North, So by opening Maronite villages, allowing more Greek Cypriots to come and live with us here, increasing the interaction with the communities, encouraging that on every level. You don't need Turkey to support that. You have to do it yourself. You have all hundreds of NGOs and bars and people like that. You have to force it. You have to force it. We live on the same island. We have to do things together, and we have to push for it. It's a constant negotiation. I mean, this thing is a constant negotiation to be more independent, to be interdependent, less rather than dependent. So we have to pay the money to Turkey when we buy the water. You know what I mean? So
Uh-huh.
that means that I'm buying it. Not you're not give it to me. I'm buying it. It's a business relationship. You know what I mean? So if we just say, all right, give me for free, and then I complain about the dependency, it doesn't work. So you have to, in a way, do it like with two entity does. Otherwise, staying dependence just causes anxieties and murmuring constantly, but doing nothing. And we have to create this interdependency with the Greek Cypriots. Varosha, why are we keeping Varosha? You know what I mean? We have to give it back without a condition. What conditions you want for the looted area? I mean, it's a shame. I was furious with when Mustafa Akıncı demanded a reciprocity for the Ganimet pictures when he was going to give it uh, uh, back to its owners. You know, this collection which was staying underneath the library there. It's a looted cultural heritage project. And it belongs to certain people, and you give it, but you don't need to ask anything back for this kind of moves and steps. This is what I mean. And we have to stop trying to please Ersin Tatar. If we don't get anything back, Ersin might say something. Yeah, he might say something. A lot of people will probably complain, but you do it. The politics is like that, especially a politician who has only 5 years left, probably in active politics. Now should be more courageous. You know what I mean? I mean, this is not a critic only for Mustafa Akıncı. I'm talking about in general the politicians. No one takes risks. Yeah, no one takes risks. They just see some crowd sometime. Like there was a demonstration of the workers who wants to go to south. Immediately I saw a lot of politicians there. You know what happened? I mean, are we talking about health issue here or the labor right? If we are talking about the labor right, first we look at the medical possibility of this opening, and then what we can do if this plague or pandemic doesn't go away. How can we help these people who works on the other side? 1,542 people. How many of them are retired persons? How many of them only depend on the salary from the south? And how many of them are socially insured and they're going to lose their probably certain rights and the unemployment benefit salary in the south if they cannot go until May? So you might as well give a ring to Nikos Anastasias and say that please make an exception for these people. They cannot come to south at the moment, and allow them to get their benefits. Kind of, there are thousands of things you can do. You don't just go there and hesha hesha hesha. Yeah, but I mean, what? I mean, this
Yeah.
kind of thing. Umut, I'm saying, I agree with you. Of course, there's asymmetric relationship. I said there is this giant there, and this over dependency. There, we keep saying that we have to stop this dependency. Yeah, when I say dependency, turn it into interdependency. We should have a proper university that they will have to queue to go in that university, not to give you a ring and take my son in and just give him a diploma kind of attitude. They have to queue. That means that we have to do a proper university or education so that everybody has to queue and pass exams or whatever to come to Cyprus. You know what I mean? To increase the quality. This is what I mean. These are not impossible things. We can do it. Empowerment is very important. So that's why I'm challenging the discourse of this self-victimization constantly, saying we cannot do anything and we have to wait. Yeah, well, I mean, wait. 45 years we've been waiting, and we have to struggle for the peaceful solution. But that doesn't mean that we cannot chew and walk at the same time. You know what I mean? So, of course, this doesn't mean the revisionist or restoring or making up, doing makeup for TRNC. TRNC will not be recognized. We know that, okay? It's just preparing this period healthily, this passage that leads to solution, so that Greek Cypriots will not fear from us. Oh my God, look at who's going to look after them? Kind of attitude. If we cannot look after ourselves, they will not want us. And it's clear, crystal clear. In order to achieve solution, we have to be, more independent in a sense of the activities, economy, more interdependent. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
the last question: what are the prospects of a solution with the Greek Cypriots right now? What's happening in that front? On that front?
Look, I mean, what happened during COVID was very good by leaving the conflict aside and demanding an aid, help from the Greek Cypriot side. It was a very good move on behalf of Mr. Akıncı, and also the government didn't cause problems as far as I could see. But and also, immediately Anastasiadis sent the planes and the helicopters, or his men, or the ministers there, I don't know. So that was very good. And the meeting they had yesterday was good as well, to create a common strategy for re-emergence of the checkpoints and everything. Because as I say, we live in the same island and everything, and it is very important to continue this dialogue. You don't need to go to Trans Montana to have a dialogue. You can have it every day here. You have to achieve this. And Mr. Secretary General, the United Nations, is insisting that you have to show collaboration, cooperation constantly, both sides. You have to believe us that you want solution. And it's not just saying, like Mr. Downer used to say, you can teach a parrot to say, I want solution. But that doesn't mean that the parrot believes in that saying or the discourse. So we have to show it. And there are tons of things that we can do. There's this half-finished Maronite issue that has to be, properly done. Did you see how demonized them the Ahmet Tolgay article he wrote yesterday? It was disgusting, demonizing Maronite. Yeah, it was disgusting. So we should not leave a space for this kind of characters, this banal, primitive, sort of ideologically motivated, beyond nationalism, I think, racist people to dominate the public sphere with this kind of fear mongering. You know what I mean? So we have to be very active. Look, I mean, now environment is a tool for reconciliation. We shared the film today with Orhan and Eskiköy, Doğuşalp and Supyal. There as well, we were trying to show that how organically the people can interact and create spaces of reconciliation. And you don't have to first discuss about the Cyprus problem, but that will come afterwards anyway. So it will be better to create these spaces, but not as carnivalesque spaces like with the expiry date. It has to be sustainable. It has to be organic. Yeah. And this has to be encouraged. As I say, we don't have to wait from outside this kind of thing. We have to do it. I mean, in order to do a project, you don't need the European Union money or it will be helpful, but that doesn't mean that you don't do anything if you don't get funding. I mean, so you have to, we have to be more active. This is what I'm trying to say in every level, every sense. That doesn't mean that you are restoring the TRNC. That this is restoring the path to peace. You could say, restoring your humanity by doing this. This is what we have to do.
Thank you, Mete, for this interesting discussion and for making the time for us. We have one more program next week. We will be discussing, this time with Rebecca Bryant, the impact of COVID-19 on higher education. So hope to see you here next week. We'll be here at 3:00. Thanks for listening and see you next week.